Chapter 51. 38 seconds to clear 5 floors of the Tower of Challenges. God Slayer shocked all the regions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 51. 38 seconds to clear 5 floors of the Tower of Challenges. God Slayer shocked all the regions. After he heard the system notification that rang beside his ear, Strongest left fist widened his eyes. He had just arrived at the 4th floor, yet God Slayer had already passed the 10th floor. This was impossible. Due to his shock, the monsters on the 4th floor consecutively attacked Strongest left fist several times. In the Tower of Challenges, the outcome of receiving damage was usually to be surrounded and beaten to death by the monsters. Strongest left fist unsurprisingly turned into white light. After he teleported out of the Tower of Challenges, Strongest left fist was still immersed in the shock from before. No, impossible, he must be using a desperate fighting style. In front of the Tower of Challenges, Strongest left fist stood still and muttered to himself. At this time, most of the players were not high-leveled, so there were no other players around the tower. Naturally, no one noticed this player who was acting strangely. This was because he actually sat down and stared at the entrance of the tower. He wanted to wait for God Slayer to come out and question him. Shouldn't they have a good fight? A strategy used by God Slayer that neglected the HP and mana simply would not bring him far. This was simply an insult to this challenge. However, in reality, all of this was an illusion of the Strongest left fist's wishful thinking. To Mike, there was no such thing as a strategy that neglected HP. Any damage would be ineffective against Mike. At this moment, Mike had already reached the 15th floor. Before the monster in front of him could fully reveal its appearance, it was swept by a series of bullets and was immediately killed. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 15th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 15th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 15th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. This system notification attracted nearly all the players in Second World. Everyone was extremely shocked at this moment. Everyone had heard of the infamous Tower of Challenges. Although everyone had not been here before, they knew that the Tower of Challenges was very difficult. Otherwise, it would not be named after the word challenge. However, what was going on now? God Slayer had already reached the 15th floor. In such a short time. Didn't the system just report that God Slayer had cleared the 10th floor? Many people could not help but put down what they were doing and began to discuss the system notification with their companions. Recently, God Slayer seems to be very famous. I've heard his name a few times. Indeed, I remember that Spider Cave's first clear was by God Slayer, and it was completed by him alone. 2 players who were setting up stalls at the entrance of the Palace of Light could not help but discuss. No way, how can one person clear the Spider Cave? Not only that, I heard that when he was in the Novice Village, he had some friction with other players. In the end, the NPC directly killed the player who disrespected the God Slayer. This is too ridiculous. Is this information accurate? It's absolutely true. This player is definitely an S.grade talent expert. Otherwise, what else can explain the system notification? That player hesitated for a moment and seemed to believe the other player's words. Indeed, unless one had awakened an S.grade talent, there was no other way to explain the notification just now. However, what kind of talent could allow an NPC to help attack other players? This was too heaven-defying. As they were discussing, another notification sounded. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 20th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 20th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 20th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. The two players who were just discussing looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. How long had it been since the last notification? A minute. Not even a minute. How did this God Slayer do it? At the same time, Strongest Left Fist, who was standing in front of the challenge tower, fell into self-doubt. Ridiculous. Other than ridiculous, he could not think of any other adjectives to describe the situation. He could understand if God Slayer fought fast. At most, he would ignore the monster's attack, lose HP and forcefully land some attacks. However, only now did he realize that this was no longer a matter of fighting style. God Slayer had only taken around 40 seconds from the 10th to the 15th floor. As an expert, Strongest Left Fist was very sensitive to time. He knew very well that it had only been 40 seconds at most, but it was probably around 38 seconds. Was it possible to clear 5 floors in 38 seconds? In the eyes of Strongest Left Fist, this was simply impossible. After clearing each floor, there would be a 5-second waiting time. This time could not be skipped, it was a compulsory wait. 5 seconds for each level. 5 levels meant 25 seconds. In other words, the time God Slayer took to kill the monsters on these 5 levels was only a little more than 10 seconds. This was the reason why Strongest Left Fist was surprised. Could it be that God Slayer had killed all the monsters of each level with one hit? He could not believe it. Even a golden legendary weapon could not do that, right? In fact, this was the only thing that he could not believe. Mike was indeed using a legendary golden weapon, and the monsters he encountered were all instantly killed. The most bizarre possibility was actually the truth. Soon, the announcement sounded again. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 25th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 25th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 25th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. When all the players heard these 3 announcements, they were in an uproar. Just who was this God Slayer? How did he do it? Many people could not help but run to the forum to post. Mysterious player God Slayer has triggered a full service announcement again. How high is God Slayer's attack power? Is God Slayer using a bug? What talent did God Slayer activate? Countless posts related to Mike appeared on the forum. Many players who were not online heard about it from their friends and classmates. Almost everyone had the same reaction. Shocked. Other than feeling shocked, it was still shocked. There were even many people who quickly went to bed and logged into Second World. They figured that their classmates and friends must be lying to them. How could anyone do that? Didn't this zone just open yesterday? Just as these players logged into Second World, a notification sounded again. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 30th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 30th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations, God Slayer has successfully completed the 30th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Chapter 52. The Convenient Staff of Meredith. Was there a more comfortable way to level up than this? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 52. The Convenient Staff of Meredith. Was there a more comfortable way to level up than this? Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. At this moment, almost all the regions were in a discussion regarding God Slayer. However, Mike was feeling a little agitated. Why was it necessary for him to wait for 5 seconds on each floor of the Tower of Challenge? It was a waste of time. After all, not even 5 seconds were needed for him to kill all the monsters on each floor. He could essentially finish the battle in 1 second. Occasionally, when attacked by magic at the beginning of the battle, Mike would switch the gun of Meredith to its umbrella form to slightly block it. Though he mostly only needed to fire a few shots with the gun form. Before he knew it, he had arrived at the 35th floor. As soon as the monster appeared, Mike raised his hand and casually fired a few shots. However, an accident happened. With a few ding sounds, the bullets fired by the gun of Meredith were actually blocked by the monster. Mike revealed a surprised smile. This was interesting. This time, the monster was a humanoid monster. It held a shield in its left hand and a one-handed sword in its right hand. The ID on the top of its head was called Wrath of Knight Wilson King. Mike's attack was blocked by that shield. Mike raised his hand and fired a few more shots. Wrath of Knight Wilson King immediately hid behind the shield. The bullets bounced off the shield one after another and no damage was caused to Wrath of Knight Wilson King. Wrath of Knight Wilson King's eyes appeared from behind the shield. He sneered and said, "Adventurer, your petty tricks have no effect on me at all." It was very common for humanoid monsters to have lines in Second World, so Mike was not surprised by this. However, he felt disdainful toward the lines spoken by Wrath of Knight Wilson King just now. Petty tricks. In that case, I'll let you know what's it like to fear death. The spear of Meredith in his hand suddenly changed under the control of Mike's will, turning into a long, metallic staff. Staff of Meredith, quality. Legendary, level 23, attack. 180, weight. 0.1 kilograms, special attribute. Could not be dropped, special effect. Elemental explosion, soul of Meredith, elemental explosion, tier passive enhancement. When using any magic attack, the damage and area of effect would increase tenfold, soul of Meredith. When using any magic attack, the mana consumption will be reduced to 0. The original effect was that the damage and area of effect would be doubled, and the mana consumption would be reduced by 20%. The original effect was already very beneficial, but after Mike's God.tier passive enhancement, it instantly became 2 invincible God.tier skills. From now on, this staff was no longer a normal magic staff. It was a magic machine gun. No, a magic bomber. Fireball. Mike shouted softly. A small red fireball immediately condensed on the tip of the staff of Meredith. This was a very low level skill, similar to a magic wand's normal magic attack. If a player was out of magic points, they could directly attack the monster with the staff, though the damage would be very low. The small fireball did not seem like a threat at all. It flew toward Wrath of Knight Wilson King. Wrath of Knight Wilson King used the back of the one-handed sword in his right hand to tap on the shield in his left hand. Then, he walked towards Mike. In his opinion, this fireball was not worth paying attention to. It was just the world's weakest spell. His 80-year-old grandmother could easily use it. It was impossible for a spell of this level to hurt him. That was what went through Wrath of Knight Wilson King's mind. The moment the small fireball hit his body, it immediately exploded. The scorching flames immediately swept through every corner of the floor like a tsunami. In the flames, Wrath of Knight Wilson King was directly burned into ashes. Moreover, what killed him was merely the most common magic staff attack. Congratulations to player God Slayer for successfully completing the 35th floor of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations to player God Slayer for successfully completing the 35th floor of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations to player God Slayer for successfully completing the 35th floor of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Another 3 notifications rang out. The players in the entire server were shocked again, but Mike did not care about it. It was just another full service announcement. He was already used to it. What made him even more surprised was the effect of the Staff of Meredith. This was much better than the Spear of Meredith. Although with Mike's attack power, he would be able to kill any monster in one hit. However, if he were to fight 10 monsters, the Spear of Meredith would need to fire 10 shots, while the Staff of Meredith only needed 1 attack. For Mike, the Staff of Meredith was more convenient to deal with ordinary monsters. Therefore, he did not switch back to the Spear of Meredith. Instead, he maintained it in the staff form and kept shooting small fireballs at the ground below his feet. The 5-second wait had just passed, and before the monsters could be seen clearly, the small fireballs exploded and killed the monsters instantly. Convenient. Easy. Comfortable. Invincible. When Mike reached the 40th floor, his body emitted a golden light. He leveled up. This was definitely not a good place for ordinary players to level up. This was evident from Mike's leveling speed. He only leveled up once after he reached the 40th floor. If it was any other player, even if they could reach the 40th floor, they would take at least a few hours. They might as well go to other dungeons to level up. However, this place was very suitable for Mike to level up. A wave of monsters appeared after 5 seconds. Mike only needed to release a small fireball on the ground to instantly kill them all. Using a small fireball once every 5 seconds was very easy. What made Mike even more satisfied was that he did not need to move at all. He just needed to stand in place. Of course, if Mike wanted to, he could just lie in place and be in any position he felt comfortable in. What could be easier than this method of leveling up? Mike had decided that if he ever needed to level up in the future, he would come to the Tower of Challenges. Moreover, after a player completed a challenge in the Tower of Challenges, they could receive a reward relative to the number of floors they reached. Although it was called completing a challenge, in fact, for ordinary players, it was just being killed by a monster. The level they died on, the reward they would receive. The higher the number of floors, the better the reward. In his previous life, Mike had heard that the Tower of Challenges record holder, Raven of Hell, had received a pair of orange legendary bracers on the 58th floor. Although it was uncertain whether the news was true, Mike felt that there was no harm trying anyway. He could just treat it as a leveling up process. However, what made Mike even more curious was if he would be able to obtain orange equipment on the 58th floor. Then, if he could reach the 100th floor or even completely clear the Tower of Challenges. What kind of reward would he receive? Chapter 53. Just a player from a new. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 53. Just a player from a new region, how powerful could he be? Mike was still in the Tower of Challenges and was releasing small fireballs out of boredom. However, at this moment, the entire second world seemed to have stopped functioning. Players who were leveling stopped leveling, players who were setting up stalls stopped setting up stalls, and players who were spending stopped spending. Everyone was focused and was waiting for the next full service announcement. Everyone was already aware of the frequency. Every 30 seconds. Every 30 seconds, there would be a full service announcement regarding God Slayer. Moreover, the number of levels in the announcement would increase by 5. Everyone no longer cared about how God Slayer did it. They were more concerned about how many levels God Slayer could complete. The highest record of the Tower of Challenges in the big region was 58 floors, and the record holder was Raven of Hell. This was something that almost everyone knew. Now, every player could not help but be curious. Could God Slayer break this record? At the same time, in Second World's big region. In the meeting room of the City Lord's Palace in Arco City, a player called Snow Eagle was seriously looking at the map on the table. As the City Lord of Arco City, not only did he need to think about the ways to protect his foundation, but he also needed to think about how to expand his territory. At this moment, he was concerned about expanding his territory. Suddenly, a player pushed open the door and entered. Snow Eagle frowned slightly, but he did not speak. He hated it when someone barged in without knocking, especially while he was deep in thought in the meeting room. However, at the same time, he knew that only his trusted subordinates would dare to do so. If they acted this way, they must have something important to inform him. Snow Eagle turned around. The person was the Legion commander of the Snow Country Guild, Snow Wolf. Did something happen? Snow Eagle asked. If it was any other player, Snow Eagle would never take the initiative to ask. However, it was different when the Legion commander came. Based on the current situation of Snow Country Guild, anything related to the Legion was extremely important. Hence, he took the initiative to speak. At this moment, Snow Wolf's expression was a little complicated. He seemed to be excited, but at the same time, a hint was worried was also present on his face. After tidying up his words, Snow Wolf said, "Guild leader, have you heard? There seems to be a monster player in the new region." New region? Snow Eagle frowned. He seemed to be unhappy with Snow Wolf. How important can the new region be? How powerful can the players in the new region be? He was unhappy as he was disturbed over such trivial matter. However, the other party was his first Legion commander, so he still gave him some face and asked, "What monster player?" Snow Wolf took a deep breath and said, "It's a player called God Slayer." Before he could finish, Snow Eagle waved his hand impatiently and said, "I know this person. He just got the NPC to help him kill a few players. It's nothing." Snow Eagle had also heard about this matter. As the guild leader of Snow Country Guild and the city lord of Arco City, he would naturally pay attention to the news on the forum. In his opinion, it was nothing more than a new player who had a talent related to NPCs that had appeared this year. This was not a big deal at all. However, the corner of Snow Wolf's eyes twitched. He shook his head and said, "What I want to talk about is not this matter, but something else." Snow Eagle's patience was almost at its limit. He had no interest in this God Slayer at all. However, he still decided to listen to Snow Wolf and berate him later. Otherwise, if he came to him for all sorts of nonsense in the future, wouldn't he be annoyed to death? "Then tell me, what is it?" Snow Wolf revealed an anxious expression. He frowned and said, "Guild leader, do you know that this new region player called God Slayer is currently in the Tower of Challenges? And he has already broken through the 50th level." After Snow Eagle heard it, he waved his hand and said, "I thought you were going to say something. Isn't it just the Tower of Challenges? In the future, this kind of thing." At this point, Snow Eagle was suddenly stunned. He looked at Snow Wolf. "What level did you say?" Snow Eagle was afraid that his ears had heard wrongly, so he hurriedly asked. "The 50th level." Snow Wolf's expression was still very grave. This time, Snow Eagle also became serious. A new player could actually reach the 50th level of the Tower of Challenges. This was simply unimaginable. The lower the level, the fewer tricks and trump cards one had. This was something everyone knew. Take skills as an example. Many skills could only be learned after reaching a certain level. In other words, the lower the level, the fewer skills there were. Under the circumstances where there were very few skills, if one wanted to reach the upper levels of the Tower of Challenges, they either had extremely powerful equipment or extremely outstanding skills. Or, one could have both. Snow Eagle narrowed his eyes. If one had powerful equipment, this was nothing to be concerned about. After all, low-level equipment would eventually be eliminated. Players could not remain at level 10 or 20 forever. However, if one had outstanding skills, then this player was worth recruiting. It was also a good choice to recruit him into the guild. After all, the highest record of the Tower of Challenges was only 58 floors. It was already very surprising that this new player could reach the 50th floor on the second day after the new region was opened. We can consider recruiting such a talent. Snow Eagle nodded. After making this comment, he planned to continue looking at the map. Previously, he had already forgiven Snow Wolf in his heart for disturbing his thoughts. Though that was it. It was still the same sentence. A new player was not worth paying too much attention to. However, Snow Eagle was not done yet. He continued, "That is not the main point. The main point is that he is advancing at an insane speed." "Really? How fast can he be?" Snow Eagle looked at the map as he asked casually. Snow Wolf hesitated for a moment before saying in a low voice, 30 seconds. 30 seconds for 5 floors. Snow Eagle was stunned for a moment and looked at Snow Wolf in shock. "How many seconds did you just say?" His eyes were filled with disbelief. 30 seconds for 5 floors, how was that possible? Yet, what he got in return was Snow Wolf's confident tone. He only needs 30 seconds to pass 5 floors. If the waiting time is removed. On average, 1 second per floor. Hearing this answer, Snow Eagle was completely shocked. 1 second per floor, instant kill. This was no longer something as simple as having powerful equipment. There must be something special about this God Slayer. Where is he now? Is there any way to contact him? Snow Eagle asked urgently. If he could recruit players with such strength into the guild 1 year later, it would definitely be an important increase in strength for the guild. Snow Wolf nodded when he heard that and said in a low voice, "Let me take a look at the forum." Meanwhile, Snow Eagle was patiently waiting at the side. After about a minute, Snow Wolf's eyes revealed a shocked expression. No, it was not shock, it was fear. "The record has been broken, what?" Snow Eagle did not hear him clearly. Snow Wolf raised his head and looked at the guild leader. His lips trembled as he said, "The highest record of the Tower of Challenges has been broken, God Slayer." Chapter 54. This guy was a genius. Rope in God Slayer at all cost. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 54. This guy was a genius. Rope in God Slayer at all cost. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, what did you say? Snow Eagle could no longer hide the shock in his eyes. The highest record of the Tower of Challenges was broken. He might be surprised, but he would not be that surprised. What truly surprised him was that someone had broken the highest record of the Tower of Challenges in the new region that had just opened yesterday. Wasn't this shocking enough? What did you say that person's name was? God Slayer. God Slayer, huh? Snow Eagle silently muttered in his heart as he memorized this name. Following that, he immediately issued an order to the 1st Legion commander, Snow Wolf. I must contact this person at all costs. I will definitely make him join our Snow Country Guild. Hearing this order, Snow Wolf agreed. He nodded his head excitedly. After all, the reason why he had come to the guild leader in such a hurry was to convince the guild leader to recruit this genius. As long as God Slayer joined the Snow Country Guild, the strength of the guild would increase greatly. After Snow Wolf left the meeting room returned to its usual peace. Snow Eagle squinted his eyes and opened the forum. He wanted to take a look at the posts related to God Slayer. The top post was related to God Slayer. The highest record of the Tower of Challenges has been broken. How did the mysterious new region player God Slayer do it? After opening the post, the details of the incident were recorded. The thread's owner was originally fighting a dungeon with his friends. When they first heard the announcement, everyone was stunned for a moment. Consequently, they were all wiped out. After they were teleported out of the dungeon, they could not help but cursed at God Slayer. They cursed him for the unnecessary full-service announcement. In the end, just as they were about to enter the dungeon again, the announcement sounded again. This time, they did not curse. Instead, they were a little surprised. This was because the interval between the two announcements was a little too fast. It was only less than 2 to 3 minutes. Just as they were discussing, the third full service announcement sounded again. Immediately, they decided to not enter the dungeon for the time being. They would wait until God Slayer stopped triggering the full service announcement. In the end, the situation got out of hand. On average, there were 2 full service announcements per minute. They had never heard of such frequent announcements before. There was a slight pause in between, but it did not take long before it returned to a 30 seconds frequency. Now that he had reached the 60th floor, it meant that he had broken the highest record of the Tower of Challenges. Even if the new region and the big server had not merged, the players in the new region knew a lot about the big server. The poster guessed that Raven of Hell should be feeling pressured now. Seeing this, the excitement in Snow Eagle's eyes became even stronger. He originally thought that God Slayer was a genius. However now, it seemed that this was no longer a matter of whether he was a genius or not. Just as the First Legion commander Snow Wolf said, God Slayer was a monster. Humans simply could not do such a thing. If they could recruit such a person, it would definitely be the luck of Snow Country. As he read, he subconsciously refreshed the post. He had no other intention. It was just a meaningless refresh. Many people would do the same. Though because of this refresh, Snow Wolf was shocked again. Because the content of the post had changed. God Slayer has already cleared the 70th level. The corner of Snow Wolf's eyes twitched twice, and a sense of crisis suddenly appeared in his heart. Snow Country must not be the only guild that had discovered such a talent. Other guilds must have also discovered it. He quickly flipped to the comments section at the bottom of the post. As expected. The few comments that had the most likes in the comments section were all invitations from the major guilds in the region. 135th comment, Flame Emperor. I wonder if Brother God Slayer is willing to join our Volcano Guild. When you see this message, you can contact me privately. The treatment is guaranteed to satisfy you. 422nd comment, Infinity. Challenge the Limits Guild will forever welcome God Slayer. The annual salary is temporarily set at 10 million. We can talk about it in detail. 677th comment, Ghost King. Hell's Frontline Guild would like to invite Brother God Slayer to join us. As long as you are willing to join, you can directly be promoted to a party leader. Half a year after you join, you will directly be promoted as the 5th Legion commander. 890th comment, Moon Picking. Our Myth Guild needs talent like God Slayer. If you want any treatment, feel free to ask us. What was more interesting was that there was a comment from a passerby player that was also trending. It was below Moon Picking's comment. 1024th comment, Ant on the Mushroom. How ironic. God actually invited God Slayer to be his companion. This comment was obviously mocking Myth Guild. After Snow Eagle read it, he silently gave a thumbs up to the comment. As the largest guild in the region, Myth Guild naturally suppressed Snow Country Guild in many areas. Snow Eagle had long been displeased with him. It was a pity that he could not defeat him. Regardless of whether it was his individual strength or the strength of the guild, he could not defeat him. Snow Eagle could not help but think that if God Slayer was willing to join Snow Country, would it be possible to surpass the Myth Guild? A hint of fanaticism appeared in Snow Eagle's eyes. It was very possible. 1,000 troops were easy to obtain, but a general was hard to obtain. The significance of a top-tier player was always the highest. I must emphasize once more to Snow Wolf. No matter the cost, I must rope in God Slayer. If I can't rope him in, I can't let other guilds succeed either. A vicious glint flashed across Snow Eagle's eyes as if he was calculating something. New York City's #1 high school, principal's office. Edward had already found out that God Slayer had broken the highest record in the Tower of Challenges. He happily opened his wine cabinet and took out the red wine that he had treasured for 5 years. This is really a great thing. I didn't expect Delia to be so outstanding. The principal muttered to himself as he opened the wine. He felt that this god slayer was definitely Delia from Class A. There was absolutely no mistake about it. Other than S.grade talents, who else could achieve such a level? Although Edward felt that it was very difficult for S.grade talents to achieve this, Delia's talent was strong cooldown reduction. If it was this talent, then it might be achievable. BL.net. After he poured half a glass of wine on the table, he placed the red wine bottle into the ice bucket and could not help but pick up the phone on his desk. Originally, he wanted to wait for the students to return to school in 2 days' time to discuss this matter, but he could no longer resist himself. After the number rang 3 times, the call was picked up. The person who answered the call was Delia's mother. "Hello, congratulations." Edward could not help but say with a look of joy. "Congratulations." Delia's mother on the other end of the phone seemed to be a little puzzled. He could vaguely hear a girl crying in the room. From the sound of it, it was probably Delia. Edward frowned slightly. An ominous feeling rose in his heart. He hurriedly asked, "Didn't Delia break the highest record in the Tower of Challenges today?" There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone. Edward was shocked by the answer. "I've heard about that. God Slayer isn't Delia." Chapter 55. The moment anticipated by everyone, the 100th floor of the Tower of Challenges. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 55. The moment anticipated by everyone, the 100th floor of the Tower of Challenges. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. What did you say? Delia isn't God Slayer. Edward was already incomparably shocked at this moment. He lost his grip on the red wine in his hand and accidentally dropped it on the floor, dyeing the floor red. But at this moment, Edward had no mood to pay attention to the red wine that he usually treasured to the extreme. There was only one question left in his mind. Who was God Slayer? It seemed that after hearing Edward's words, Delia's cries on the other end of the phone became even louder. Delia's mother hurriedly said a few words to Edward before directly hanging up the phone. She needed to comfort her daughter. Delia, who was the most outstanding student in the current batch of New York City's #1 high school, was now being outclassed by God Slayer who had suddenly appeared. Moreover, she was utterly outclassed by the God Slayer. The pride of a genius was instantly shattered. Edward, who was in the office, listened to the busy tone on the phone and was silent for a long time. His heart rate remained high for a long time. He hung up the phone in a state of confusion and then called the principal of Washington's top high school. "Hey, let me ask you something. Don't lie to me," Edward asked in a serious tone. The other party was silent for a moment and answered, "Ask away." Edward took a deep breath and tried to calm his tone, but his voice was still a little shaky. "Is this year's God Slayer a student of your school?" After hearing it, the other party was a little angry at first. "Edward, are you here to mock me? If so, then you've succeeded." However, when Edward heard this, he was slightly stunned. "What do you mean?" The person on the other end of the line was also stunned. Clearly, there was some misunderstanding between the two. "Isn't God Slayer Delia from Class A of your school?" It was very normal for various schools to know each other's outstanding students. However, Edward sighed, "I wish she was God Slayer, but unfortunately, it's someone else." The other end of the phone fell silent again. "God Slayer is not a student of our school either. Our school doesn't have any S.grade talents this year." The two of them fell silent. They were both wondering who this God Slayer was. After asking this question, the two of them no longer had the mood to continue the conversation. They chatted for a while and politely greeted each other. "Then I'll see you at the end of the month's student exchange meeting." "Okay." After hanging up, Edward was silent for a long time. The identity of this God Slayer was still a mystery. If he could not find out who this student was before the end of the month's student exchange meeting, then New York City's #1 high school might not be able to win the championship this time. He had to find out as soon as possible. Thinking of this, he immediately picked up the phone and dialed. "Charlie, this is Edward. Hurry up and find out which school God Slayer in the new region is from. I know it's difficult, but we have to do this. Yes, we have to find out at all costs. If it's possible, transfer him to our school at any cost." After hanging up the phone, Edward looked at the red wine in the ice bucket in a daze. This year would not be a simple year. Mike's matter had already caused many reactions in the real world, but he was still in the Tower of Challenges. Furthermore, he had already reached the 99th floor. At this moment, the entire second world was boiling. No one was doing anything. They were all waiting. Waiting for God Slayer to clear the 100th level. This could definitely be considered a milestone for Second World. If God Slayer really succeeded, everyone in this region would feel proud. Strongest Left Fist, who was waiting under the tower, had gradually changed his mindset. He was very conflicted now. On one hand, he really wanted to see God Slayer successfully clear the 100th level. On the other hand, he did not want the God Slayer to succeed, because he felt that he could clear the 100th level in the future, just not now. If God Slayer succeeded today, then there would be no purpose for him to complete the 100th level in the future. Other people would always remember Everest, but 99% of the people in the world were not aware of the second highest mountain in the world. God Slayer. Strongest Left Fist's eyes were burning with fighting spirit. This man would be his only challenge target in Second World. He would work hard to surpass God Slayer. The 99th floor. When he saw the monster corpses lying on the ground, Mike yawned. Boring, it was too boring. Too easy. He only needed to casually release a small fireball on the ground to clear the monsters on the floor. What if the monster's HP was too high and one fireball couldn't clear it? Just release another fireball. This was how he reached the 99th floor. After Mike released the first fireball, the monster did not die. However, when the second fireball was launched, the monsters were all dead. It was too easy. It seemed that the Tower of Challenges was just. After clearing the 100th floor, he might as well quit. It was no fun. Mike even felt that the 5-second waiting time was a bit long. 5 seconds finally passed. Mike raised his staff and released the fireball again. Let all this end with this fireball. However, after the fireball spell was cast, Mike frowned. Because he found that there were no monsters on the 100th floor. What's going on? Mike was slightly stunned and stopped casting the fireball spell. L.RG, can it be that the monsters on this floor are invisible? Mike could not help but think so. Though it was not the case. At this time, a very complicated purple magic circle suddenly appeared on the ground. Countless profound and obscure runes in the magic circle glowed faintly as if they were breathing. Waves of black aura came from the magic circle. Mike's eyes lit up. It seemed that the 100th floor was indeed different from the previous floors. Finally, there was something new. Mike focused his attention on the magic circle. In the middle of the magic circle, a black figure slowly appeared. It looked as if it had emerged from the ground. When the black figure's feet eventually appeared on the ground, the black film around the figure finally disappeared, revealing the appearance of the person inside. Seeing this person, Mike was slightly stunned. A black shabby hooded robe, a skull face, and an especially large black sickle. You are Death. Chapter 56. The 100th Challenge, Killing God with One Slash. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 56. The 100th Challenge, Killing God with One Slash. The black-robed skeleton man who was holding a black scythe let out a cold laugh. I didn't expect that there would be an adventurer who could recognize me. That's right, I am the god of death. After hearing this answer, Mike raised his staff and directly shot a small fireball at the god of death. The fireball exploded on the spot, but it did not pose any threat to Death God. Death God laughed sinisterly again, he, what you see is just a projection. The real me is in the underworld. Mike nodded slightly to show that he understood. Then, he asked, so, why did you suddenly come and look for me? What about the challenge on the 100th floor? Death God laughed sinisterly and answered, since I'm here, I naturally have a reason. In fact, the person I'm looking for isn't you, but someone who can reach the 100th floor. Because I have something for you to do, he. Death God raised his sickle and circled around Mike, seemingly sizing him up. Mike knew that this Death God was going to give him a mission. He did not expect that the 100th floor of the Tower of Challenges could trigger a mission. No one had ever known of this. After all, the highest record had always been the 58th floor, thus it was normal that no one knew about this. Mike said calmly, since there's a mission, then hurry up and issue it. He. Death God seemed to especially like making this kind of ear-piercing laughter. He looked at Mike with his eyes that had no eyeballs and said, what I want you to do is not a simple thing. Before I hand it over to you, I have to assess your strength first. In other words, I still have to fight on the 100th floor. TSK, how troublesome. Just hurry up and release the enemy. Mike curled his lips with an annoyed look. He. Death God raised his sickle and said to Mike, it seems that you still don't understand the situation. The challenge you will face on the 100th floor is me. You. Mike sized him up. You want me to fight with a projection? Aren't you acting shamelessly? Of course you won't be fighting my projection. He. Death God finished circling around Mike and stood in front of him. He said, I will release my Divine Sense clone to come here. You will be fighting with my Divine Sense clone. Of course, you absolutely can't win. Even if my Divine Sense clone only has 1% of my original body's strength, you still can't win. Mike curled his lips and did not say anything. Words were often powerless. Action spoke louder than words. Death God obviously did not realize Mike's thoughts. He continued saying, you only need to use your full strength to fight against my Divine Sense clone. If I feel that you can meet my requirements, this mission will be handed over to you. He, the reward for this mission is very generous. You can rest assured. Then, are you ready, human adventurer? Mike yawned out of boredom and urged, we could have started fighting long ago. Death God laughed sinisterly and said, he, then attack me. I'll let you attack me first. Hearing this, Mike's face was distorted as he tried to hold back his laughter. He did not mean anything else. Because he genuinely found this sentence hilarious. Letting him attack first was no different from declaring the end of the battle. However, since Death God had already offered, Mike naturally had no reason to refuse. If that's the case, then take this. With a slight shake of his left hand, the gun of Meredith in Mike's hand immediately underwent a transformation. Sword of Meredith, sword form, quality. Legendary, level 25, attack. 200, special attribute. Could not be dropped, special effect. Infinite Sword Shadow, Heart of Meredith, Infinite Sword Shadow, God. Tier passive enhancement. Each attack will trigger 10 slashes. Heart of Meredith, God. Tier passive enhancement. When faced with a stronger enemy, all latent power in the wielder's body would be activated. Mike changed his weapon into sword form. Because of the Heart of Meredith skill, sword form was the most suitable enemy to deal with powerful enemies. Was Death God powerful? The answer was without a doubt. After all, the opponent was a god. Even if it was 1% of his strength, a god was still a god. This was also the reason why Death God thought that it was absolutely impossible for Mike to win. At this time, Death God had already changed from a projection state to a divine sense clone. So, an ID appeared above his head. Death God, Arthas, his level was level 999. On the other hand, Mike. He was just a level 25 human adventurer. In the eyes of Death God, he was no different from an ant. If not for the fact that he could not do the mission himself, how would he take a fancy to an ant? He, adventurer, you don't have to be afraid. Just attack me. Mike smiled slightly and carried the sword of Meredith on his shoulder. He asked in return, if I accidentally kill your divine sense clone, you won't seek revenge on me, right? Hearing this question, Death God, Arthas was slightly stunned at first, then he could not help but laugh out loud. Is this what ignorant or fearless meant? What a joke. Your worries are unnecessary. If you can really kill me, I will give you a reward. Death God, Arthas said confidently. At the same time, the skeleton raised his left hand gently. A black book suddenly appeared in the air above his left hand. What is this? Mike raised his eyebrows. The reward from Death God would naturally be good, but he still wanted to know what this thing was. It was best to explain this in advance. Otherwise, if the other party gave him a trash book that looked exactly the same, wouldn't he be at a loss? Death God, Arthas laughed sinisterly. This book is a divine artifact, law. As long as you have this book, you can modify the essence of anything. After Mike heard it, his eyes revealed a fervent light. Black, divine artifact. These two words were enough to explain the value of this thing. In that case, can I start now? No problem. Death God, Arthas was still brimming with confidence. The next second, the sword of Meredith directly slashed over and cut Death God, Arthas in half. His eyes were filled with shock. A huge number appeared above his head. 999999999999999, 1/ God slain. Chapter 57. The Tower of Challenges would be closed from now on, forever. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 57. The Tower of Challenges would be closed from now on, forever. The highest record. At this moment, the surrounding environment fell silent. Even Mike was shocked speechless at the sight of the amount of damage. He figured that he could instantly kill this divine sense clone that had 1% of the original body's strength, but he never expected himself to actually deal such high damage. At this moment, a full service announcement for Second World rang out. Congratulations to player God Slayer for successfully completing the 100th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations to player God Slayer for successfully completing the 100th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. Congratulations to player God Slayer for successfully completing the 100th level of the Tower of Challenges, setting a new record. After these three announcements sounded, the whole world was in an uproar. Many players shouted excitedly. 100th level. God Slayer actually cleared the 100th level. This was simply a miracle. Not only did God Slayer accomplish a great feat, but he also used his actions to prove something to the whole world. In Second World, anything was possible. Regardless of the method used to clear the 100th level. From this moment on, everyone would remember the ID God Slayer. In the future, even the textbooks would mention this. However, just as everyone was in a state of excitement, something strange happened. The full service announcement was issued once again. Congratulations to player God Slayer for successfully completing all levels of the Tower of Challenges. The Tower of Challenges will be closing soon. Congratulations to player God Slayer for successfully completing all levels of the Tower of Challenges. The Tower of Challenges will be closing soon. Congratulations to player God Slayer for successfully completing all levels of the Tower of Challenges. The Tower of Challenges will be closing soon. Hearing these 3 announcements, all the players were dumbfounded. The Tower of Challenges would be closed. What the F***? A player actually closed a special dungeon. Was this really something that players could do? In fact, it was very reasonable. The reason for the existence of the Tower of Challenges was to find a player who could help Death God, Arthas, to complete the mission. Since he had already found the person, the Tower of Challenges would naturally be closed. At the same time, Strongest Left Fist outside the Tower of Challenges was shocked speechless. He was just thinking that one day, he would definitely break the record set by God Slayer to prove his strength. However, now the Tower of Challenges was closed. How could he break the record? Didn't this mean that he could never surpass God Slayer via the Tower of Challenges? Strongest Left Fist held his head in agony. After he entered Second World, he set himself a goal to challenge all the strong people in Second World and become the strongest man. He did not expect to encounter such a big setback on his first challenge. It seems that I'm still too weak. Strongest Left Fist muttered to himself with a dejected face. He left in disappointment. In the Tower of Challenges, Death God, Arthas reappeared. This time, there was no ID on his head. It was a projection, so he could not attack him. Mike looked at the other party's skull face and grinned. Look, I defeated you. Can you fulfill your promise? The other party did not speak. That book was extremely important to him. He absolutely could not give it away. He had said that before because this situation had never occurred to him before. How could a level 25 human adventurer kill his Divine Sense clone? Not to mention level 25. It would be impossible even for a level 100 adventurer. Since it was something impossible for an adventurer to accomplish, hence he just spoke nonsense regarding the reward. This would also stimulate the adventurer to reveal his full strength. He could use this to confirm whether the adventurer in front of him could help him complete the mission properly. However, now, the most impossible thing had happened. Death God, Arthas was silently thinking of ways to deny this matter. Oh my, Lord Death God, are you trying to renege on your promise? Mike pretended to be surprised and asked. Hearing this, Death God, Arthas's heart skipped a beat. He really wanted to say something, but Mike did not give him a chance. No, no, no. Lord Death God is a noble god. How could he go back on his word to a small human adventurer? After all, adventurers do things without a care. They might go to the temples and repeat this matter 1,000,000 times. In that case, all the gods will know that Death God went back on his word. Moreover, adventurers won't be completely killed. Even if they die, they can be resurrected. In the end, adventurers will at most be defeated back to level 1. Though if the gods go back on their word, I'm afraid that they will always be mocked by other gods in the future. Mike stroked his chin and analyzed seriously. It sounded like he was comforting himself, but in fact, he was threatening Death God, Arthas. Death God, Arthas naturally understood him. He said with a very ugly expression, but, if I lose law, I will also be ridiculed by them. The moment he said this, he was actually thinking of reneging on his promise. However, Mike smiled slightly and said, but there's no point for adventurers to go around spreading the fact that gods are very honest, don't you think? Death God, Arthas did not speak. He was weighing the pros and cons in his mind. Theoretically speaking, if the adventurer in front of him did not tell anyone about this, he could indeed retain his reputation. Nevertheless, in the end, he still felt a little heartache. Seeing that Death God, Arthas was a little hesitant, Mike deliberately said, Sci, if you want to go back on your word, I can't do anything about it. In that case, I'll go to other shrines and chat with their believers. After saying this, he acted as if he wanted to leave the Tower of Challenges. At this moment, Death God, Arthas finally compromised. Wait, I didn't say I want to go back on my word. After saying that, he raised his left hand, and the black book reappeared. Now, it's yours. But remember, you can't let other gods know about this. Death God, who had been laughing sinisterly at the beginning, could no longer bring himself to laugh. Mike chuckled and took the black artifact. Law, level 0, attack 0, defense 0, special effect. Rule modification, could modify the rules of any equipment, skills, pets, and other matters. Looking at the description, Mike narrowed his eyes slightly. This was an active skill, so it would not be affected by his God-tier passive enhancement. Regardless, it was still a divine artifact, so even if it was not affected, it was still powerful enough. However, the problem now was that the skill description of rule modification was a little vague. He could not understand it. Without waiting for him to continue studying it, Death God, Arthas said in an unfriendly tone, "I've given it to you. Now it's time to talk about business. I have a task for you. If you complete it, I will give you other rewards." Chapter 58. A Quest to Become Enemies with God. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 58. A Quest to Become Enemies with God. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Mike smiled. Of course he was willing to accept the quest. Although all the NPCs in Second World had intelligent AI and were like living individuals who had their own ability to think, there was one thing that Mike would never worry about. That was the quest reward. As long as it was issued in the form of a quest, the reward would definitely not be reneged. The reason why Mike guessed that Death God, Arthas would want to go back on his word was that the battle was not issued in the form of a quest. Instead, it was delivered orally. If Death God, Arthas had just issued a quest, then the reward would definitely be given. However, no one could say for sure what was promised verbally. Then, what kind of mission do you want me to do? Upon hearing this, Death God, Arthas once again returned to his original state. This mission is very difficult. I have to tell you first. Once I release this mission, you must accept it. Mike narrowed his eyes slightly. This kind of situation was very rare. Under normal circumstances, NPCs would tell you the contents of the mission first, and then you could consider whether to accept it or not. Although the missions were mostly accepted, at least the players had room for choices. This time, it was the exact opposite. The mission had to be accepted before he would release the contents of the mission. From this, it could be seen that the content of the mission was very important. At least, it was not something that could be told to anyone. For Mike, the more special the mission, the more he would not let it slip by. No problem, I accept it. Who asked you to give me such a good thing? As he said that, Mike casually flipped the law in his hand. Seeing Mike's appearance, Death God, Arthas could not laugh anymore. Humph, Death God, Arthas snorted and issued the mission. A black dialogue box appeared in front of Mike. Do you accept the mission, great believer of fire god? Mike raised his eyebrows slightly. He had some guesses in his heart. This mission was definitely troublesome. However, I'm never afraid of trouble. I accept this mission. Soon, the dialogue box disappeared, and a new mission appeared in the mission pane. Great believer of fire god, other than this mission, there were other missions on the mission pane. Lover. Go to Victory City to look for Tiffany. Legend of the Hero. Go to the Hall of Heroes to look for Adjutant Welsh. Looking at these quests, Mike's face turned red. He just realized that he still had many pending quests. It seemed that he had to hurry up and do the quests. Although the quests could be read through the introduction in the quest board to know what he should do, Mike's habit was to listen to the NPC's dictation. Many details could only be understood through dictation. So Mike asked, then, what exactly should I do next? Death God smiled sinisterly, he, don't blame me for not reminding you about this. If you accept it, there's no turning back. What I want you to do is very simple. You just need to help me kill the great believer of fire God. Mike narrowed his eyes slightly and revealed a smile. He really liked this mission. To Mike, was there any mission that was easier than directly killing the other party? If there was, it would be that the other party would just stand still in front of Mike. Seeing Mike smile, Death God, Arthas reminded him with a sinister smile, don't say that I didn't remind you. Once you killed a great believer of fire God, he will definitely not let you off. At the very least, you won't be able to obtain the blessing of fire God for the rest of your life. Oh. Won't let me off. Then what will happen? That guy, the god of fire, might send a divine sense clone to kill you. Death God, Arthas had a smug look on his face as if he had said something terrifying. However, Mike shrugged his shoulders. A divine sense clone. Is it very scary? Didn't I just kill one with a single slash? Death God could not smile anymore. Forget it. You're such an annoying adventurer. Hurry up and finish the mission. As he said that, Death God, Arthas planned to leave this place. After all, he had built this tower of challenges to find someone who could help him complete this mission. Now that he had found it, he naturally had no reason to come back. Wait, don't go yet. Mike stopped him and asked, if I help you complete the mission, what benefits will you give me? Benefits. Death God, Arthas said disdainfully, I will give you the Death God's power. What's the use? Death God, Arthas felt that he was a little short on oxygen. Even though he was a skeleton and had no trachea or lungs. Death God's power is equivalent to giving you a temporary divine sense. Mike nodded slightly when he heard that. A skill like spiritual sense was still very useful. For example, when Mike first saw Death God, he could not see his ID, and he was also unable to attack the other party. However, if he had divine sense, even if it was just a projection, Mike could still attack it. Of course, as a projection, it could not attack Mike. Similarly, even if its real body was standing there, as long as Mike had divine sense, he could attack the god. As long as he had divine sense, God Slayer would really become a God Slayer. Mike smiled and said, I have a suggestion. Death God, Arthas was silent for a moment and asked, what suggestion? Mike smiled and said, if I kill all the believers of fire God, what reward will you give me? Hearing this suggestion, Death God's eyes lit up. Even though his eyes were non-existent. Are you serious? Of course. Mike's answer was very decisive, without the slightest hesitation. Death God laughed sinisterly again, human adventurers nowadays are really bold and reckless. Interesting. If you can kill all the believers of fire God, I will give you this death scythe. Death God, Arthas waved the huge scythe in his hand. Mike narrowed his eyes. Do you think I'm stupid? How could you give me your scythe? It took me so long to ask you for a book just now. After being exposed, Death God, Arthas's expression was a little ugly. Even though he was faceless. Then what do you want? Mike looked Death up and down, thought for a moment, and said, I want this robe of yours. Deal. In the next moment, the great believer of fire God had disappeared from Mike's quest bar. In its place was kill all the believers of fire God. If the previous quest would end up offending the god, then the current quest would cause Mike to be an enemy of the god. Mike nodded in satisfaction. This way, the quest was much more interesting. Chapter 59. The Function of the Divine. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 59. The function of the divine artifact, Law, was truly invincible. When he left the Tower of Challenges, Mike had already reached level 28. Before the 100th floor, Mike was already at level 25. Defeating Death God, Arthas's Divine Sense clone gave Mike a large amount of experience. He directly leveled up to level 27. Moreover, the 100th floor was the last level, thus he could not advance any further. Mike's challenge was over. After completing the 100th floor, Mike leveled up again, to level 28. At the same time, Mike received 1,000 gold coins as a reward. Unfortunately, he did not get any equipment. On the other hand, Mike received a very excellent artifact, Law, and a very exciting follow-up quest. It had to be said that the reward for this mission was very generous. Mike decided to go back to the Tower of Challenges again to level up. In the end, the system notified him that he could not enter the Tower of Challenges. Mike was slightly stunned at first, then he understood. It seemed that the owner of this Tower of Challenges was Death God, Arthas. Since he had found Mike to help him with the mission, there was naturally no need to keep the Tower of Challenges open. Mike could not help but be curious. After a year, after the new region and the big region were merged, would players still be able to enter the Tower of Challenges? Could this mission be done again? Of course, there were no answers to these questions now. Mike did not think too deeply about this matter. Instead, he took out Law and began to study it. The introduction of Law said. Rule modification. Could modify the rules of any equipment, skills, pets, and other matters. The introduction was very vague. The ways to modify it, how it could be modified and the post-modification side effects were all unclear. Mike glanced at the sword of Meredith in his hand. Could Law strengthen this weapon? He thought for a moment and finally took out the vampiric wristband from his backpack. If he was looking for something to experiment on, this vampiric wristband was obviously the best candidate. Although it was very useful to Mike, even if something went wrong, he could still find other vampiric equipment as substitutes in the future. Regardless, the sword of Meredith definitely could not be used for experiments. Such precious equipment would really be gone if damaged. After making up his mind, Mike used Law to modify the vampiric wristband. Then, the equipment immediately disappeared. Mike's heart suddenly jumped. Fortunately, he did not directly modify the sword of Meredith with Law. In the next moment, a selection box appeared in front of Mike. Vampiric wristband have been absorbed. Available. Option 1, modify the Law and change the equipment into an active character skill, blood absorption. Option 2, modify the Law and change the equipment into a passive character skill, blood absorption. Option 3, modify the Law and change the equipment into an active equipment skill, blood absorption. Option 4, modify the Law and change the equipment into a passive equipment skill, blood absorption. Option 5. Modify the Law and change the equipment into the pet's active skill, blood absorption. Option 6, modify the Law and change the equipment into the pet's passive skill, blood absorption. Option 7, modify the Law and change the equipment into an active skill book, blood absorption. Option 8, modify the Law and change the equipment into a passive skill book, blood absorption. Other than that, there were many other options, such as transforming it into a buff or other similar options. Looking at these densely packed options, Mike was slightly stunned. He subconsciously glanced at the black book, Law, in his right hand. This divine artifact was simply too godly. With this thing, he could turn anything into a passive skill. If matched with his SSS.grade talent God.tier passive enhancement. Mike could not help but tremble in excitement. It was too invincible. Without any hesitation, he immediately chose the passive character skill. In the next moment, a new skill appeared in Mike's skill pane. Blood absorption, God.class passive enhancement. Absorbs 1000% HP when dealing damage. Mike sucked in a breath of cold air. Hiss. This thing is invincible. Imagine if he had 100 million HP, even if he was on the verge of death, and had only 1% left. With a single slash, he would be back to full health. He was simply invincible. Mike immediately took out the other two pieces of vampiric equipment and used rule modification on them. He also chose to modify them into a passive skill. He wanted to try and see if this passive skill could be stacked. In the next moment, the two pieces of equipment disappeared. Mike opened the skill pane with an uneasy feeling. In the next moment, Mike's eyes widened. Blood absorption, God.tier passive enhancement. Absorbs 3000% HP when dealing damage. Hiss, Mike sucked in a breath of cold air again. As expected of a divine artifact. It could actually be accumulated. Even if it could not, Mike would still find it very reasonable. However, the skills could actually be accumulated. Mike felt a little excited at this moment. He stood there and adjusted his breathing for a long time, trying to calm himself down, but he could not calm down at all. If it were anyone else, they would not be able to calm down either. He looked at the time, and before he knew it, it was almost noon. He might as well stop for now, and continue playing after eating. Mike split the 1,000 gold coins in his hand and posted 900 gold coins up for sale on the forum. After all, he had spent so much money to buy gold coins before. Now that he had no money in his real account, he needed to earn some living expenses. These 1,000 gold coins were nothing in the big region, but in the new region, it was practically a huge fortune. In fact, it was basically impossible for anyone in the new region to reach the 100th floor. Mike's situation could not be considered normal. Mike looked at the price of gold coins on the forum. It was a little cheaper than yesterday, but the difference was not big. Gold coins had been declining since the first day the server opened. As the players' strength gradually increased, the way to obtain gold coins became easier and easier, and the gold coins would naturally depreciate. Therefore, the earlier he sold them, the better. When he needed gold coins, he would just spend money to buy them. After posting 900 gold coins on the forum, Mike went offline. Opening his eyes and looking at the familiar room, Mike could not help but think. Shall I move to a bigger house? After all, he was invincible in Second World. Making money was as easy as sneezing. There was no reason to live in such poverty. Mike thought about it and decided to buy a new house in the next few days. O.org. As for today, he would have dinner first. He called Little Fat Tom. Chapter 60. Minimum consumption. What is the maximum consumption in your restaurant? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 60. Minimum consumption. What is the maximum consumption in your restaurant? Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The call quickly went through. Tom, are you coming out for dinner? My treat. Mike laid on the bed and said with a smile. The person on the other end of the line was slightly stunned. Good brother, did you win the lottery? Lottery my ass, let's meet at the usual place. After saying that, he hung up the phone. Mike walked to the bathroom to wash his face. Looking at his young face, he was filled with endless emotions. He did not expect that after someone died, they could actually travel back to the past. Moreover, he had even obtained such amazing achievements. Although it had only been 2 days, Mike felt that his life in these 2 days was 10,000 times more exciting than his previous life. After changing into a clean set of clothes, Mike left. As usual, he took a taxi. Since he had money, he naturally did not need to use his money sparingly. Traveling via a taxi was definitely much faster than walking or taking the bus. In just 10 minutes, Mike arrived at his destination. Little Fat Tom was already waiting for him there. Seeing Mike get out of the taxi, Little Fat Tom's eyes almost popped out. Good brother, did you really win the lottery? Mike was speechless. However, it was normal for Tom to think that way. After all, he had always been poor. Today, he suddenly took a taxi and said that he would treat Tom to a meal. Naturally, Tom was very surprised. Mike did not explain the lottery, so little fat Tom just pushed the door open and entered the fast food restaurant. At this moment, Mike spoke. "Wait a minute, I'm not eating at this restaurant today." Tom was slightly stunned. He turned his head and looked at Mike with a puzzled look. The meaning behind his look was clear. If they were not eating at this restaurant, then was Mike treating Tom to bread? Mike smiled slightly and took Tom's hand and walked to the side. Tom could not help but say, "Oh, I understand. You want to treat me to spaghetti, right?" There were no other cheap restaurants in this direction other than spaghetti. There were also some restaurants that were neither cheap nor expensive. Tom had tried them before. After all, he came from a decent family. However, he doubted that Mike could afford such a restaurant. However, when he passed by the spaghetti restaurant, Mike did not go in. Tom's eyes were filled with doubt. There were only two shops ahead. One was a very expensive French restaurant, and the other was a middle-class restaurant that he had been to. It seemed that Mike was going to take him to a middle-class restaurant. With this thought in his mind, Tom took a few steps forward and was prepared to go in first. He could be considered to be acquainted with the boss. Perhaps, if he greeted the boss, their bill would be cheaper. However, Mike still stopped him. "Tom, can you stop running around? We're not eating at this restaurant." The doubt on Tom's face became even more apparent. Not eating at this restaurant. Could it be that they were going to eat in another street? Wasn't that too troublesome? Moreover, if they were going to eat elsewhere, why would they gather here? However, just as little fat Tom was feeling extremely puzzled, Mike walked into the high-priced French restaurant, Medieval Rose. The fat boy turned pale with fright and quickly ran over to stop Mike. "Brother, did you go to the wrong restaurant? I can't afford this shop." Although Mike did say that it was his treat and that Tom would not need to pay. However, Tom still brought some money, just in case. Though now the restaurant had clearly exceeded the level of their budget. If they did not have the money to pay after their meal, the other party would probably call the police and arrest them. Little fat Tom had no doubt that if his father found out about this, he would definitely be lectured. Surprisingly, Mike smiled slightly and gestured, "Don't worry, let's just dine in here. I have money." He had sold 900 gold coins on the forum. These gold coins would definitely be sold out before he finished his meal, so Mike was not worried about paying the bill at all. Although little fat Tom did not believe him, he still gritted his teeth and followed Mike in. If there was really no other way, he would just endure the beating from his father. Little fat Tom entered with the awareness of losing his life. As soon as the two entered the door, the waiter at the door stopped them. "Excuse me, are you looking for someone?" From the waiter's point of view, these two guys were definitely not here to eat. The handsome young man in front of him looked very poor. Although the chubby young man looked a little better judging from his clothes, he was still not the type of person who could spend money here. However, Mike snorted coldly and said, "Is this how you Medieval Rose treat guests?" "I'm sorry, sir." The waiter nodded politely and said, "A guest is equivalent to God, but only a customer is a guest." The message behind his words was the same. If you couldn't afford to spend, then you would not be a customer. Mike sneered and said, "Call your manager over." The waiter didn't move at all. Instead, he explained calmly, "I'm sorry, sir. I can't call the manager over such a small matter. If you still want to cause trouble, I'll need to call security." From the waiter's point of view, these two people were clearly just causing trouble. The manager was currently accompanying the young master. How could he have the time to care about such matters? Little fat Tom, who was beside him, saw the burly man dressed in a security uniform not far away. He was obviously a little scared. He secretly tugged on the corner of Mike's shirt and said, "Forget it. Why don't we change to another restaurant? Mike shook his head. No, I must make this waiter apologize to me today. The waiter sneered. Sir, I don't think I've done anything wrong. Just as the few of them were arguing, the door of the innermost private room opened. A middle-aged man in a suit walked over and reprimanded, Tony, don't you know that the eldest young master is here today? Why are you arguing here? Seeing that the manager was angry, the waiter named Tony immediately turned around and bowed to apologize. I'm sorry, manager. It's just that these two people just came in and are causing trouble. The manager turned around and looked Mike and Tom up and down with a frown. Are you guys here to cause trouble? Mike did not flinch at all and said coldly, we're here to eat, but this waiter blocked the way and refused to let us in. Ha! When the manager heard this, he immediately laughed out loud, as if he had heard a joke. Not a hint of reproach could be seen as he looked at Tony. In his opinion, the waiter had done nothing wrong. Here to spend money. Can you afford it? The lowest per capita consumption here is 200 Federation coins. When little fat Tom heard this, he gritted his teeth and said, so what if it's 200 Federation coins? We can afford it. 200 Federation coins were actually very expensive, but he could still afford it at the cost of being beaten up by his father. However, Mike sneered and said, the lowest per capita consumption. Who are you looking down on? What's the highest consumption in your shop? When he said this, the manager and the waiter all laughed. When little fat Tom heard this, he had a surprised look on his face. Moreover, the teenager in the innermost box also heard the commotion and looked over.